This training mission follows the procedures described on the flight manual of the real aircraft, adapted for use on the A-4E Community Aircraft Module of DCS. The procedure step numbers, when provided, corresponds to those of the NATOPS manual. For brevity, we will skip those steps that corresponds to items not simulated yet, or that can't be performed on DCS. Even though the interior inspection is not really needed, as on DCS it is assumed already done, on this training mission you can choose to perform the interior inspection anyway, to provide cockpit familiarization to new pilots of the A-4E. If you are short on time, you can choose to skip all checks and tests that are non-essential on DCS. The cold start procedure includes the following sections. Interior inspection. Before starting the engine. Starting the engine. Post-start checklist. If the cockpit interior is too dark, activate the flashlight with right Ctrl plus L. If the yellow cross cursor is not visible, press left Alt plus left Shift plus C to make it appear. You can adjust the sound volume produced by the background air traffic by moving the in-cockpit sound slider on the DCS options audio screen, which you can access by pressing the escape key. This instructor's volume level can be adjusted with the helmet sound slider. Also, you can press spacebar to skip long voiceovers. Press backspace if you want to perform the interior inspection section of the cold start procedure. If you prefer to skip this section, press spacebar. Skipping the interior inspection section of the cold start procedure. Press backspace if you want to perform the check steps of the cold start procedure. If you prefer to skip those tests, press spacebar. You have chosen to skip all the functional checks of the cold start. Starting the engine. The A-4E electrical system does not include batteries. Also, there is no APU to provide starting air. Because of this, an external electrical power supply and a source of starter air are required for ground starting the engine. 1. External ground power. Connect. Bring up the communications menu, with the backslash key. Select F8. Ground crew. F2. Ground electric power. F1. Turn power on. Even though we asked just for ground electric power, the ground crew is also connected starting air to provide airflow to rotate the turbine during the ignition.
Ground power is now on.
Skipping check of warning lights. 3. Throttle off. Check that both the virtual aircraft throttle and your real HOTAS throttle are at the off position. 4. Engine starter switch. Depress to start. When the switch is depressed, the starter air supply valve opens, allowing compressed air to rotate the starter. A holding relay retains the switch in the start position. Once the engine speed reaches approximately 50% RPM, the engine starter switch will pop up, stopping the air supply to the starter. 5. At 5% RPM throttle to ignition, by right-clicking the throttle lever. The ignition switch is actuated by movement of the throttle inboard, from the off position, into the ignition position. 6. At 15% RPM. Throttle to idle, right-click again. This opens a fuel cutoff valve in the fuel control unit, providing fuel flow to the engine and allowing it to start. 7. Stabilized idle RPM. 56 to 58% at 20 degrees Celsius. Light off should occur within 20 seconds after the throttle is moved outboard to start the ignition cycle, and is indicated by a rise in EGT after the throttle is moved to the idle position. Normally, the engine will stabilize at idle RPM within 45 seconds from depressing the engine start button. 9. External electrical power and starting air. Disconnect. Now that our aircraft's engine is running, electrical power is being supplied by a 10 kVA, engine-driven generator, so we can now disconnect the external ground power. Bring up the communications menu, with the backslash key. Select F8. Ground crew. F2. Ground electric power. F2. Turn power off. This will have the ground crew disconnect from the aircraft both the electric and air supply connections.
Ground power is now off.
If light off is satisfactory and engine speed is stabilized with the throttle at idle, check the following. 1. RPM. Idle at 56 to 58% at 20 degrees Celsius. Skipping the exhaust gas turbine temperature gauge check. Skipping the fuel boost advisory check. Skipping oil pressure gauge check. Skipping oil quantity indicator check. Electronic equipment warm-up. The A-4E electronic equipment needs a warm-up time before we are able to do their pre-flight checks. We will turn them to standby, so they can warm up while we do other checks. A. Turn the navigation computer to standby for a 2 minutes warm-up. B. Turn the Doppler navigation radar to standby for a 5-minute warm-up. Skipping ICLS bit check. Post-start checklist. When electrical power becomes available after starting engine, check the following items. 2. UHF function switch. Set to DR+G. The Skyhawk is equipped with only a single communications radio, an ARC-51A UHF radio, which provides voice communication between aircraft, ships, or ground-based radio stations. This radio is energized by rotating its function selector switch from off to DR or TR+G. It can tune frequencies between 225 and 339.95 MHz. 4. TACAN switch, set to receive for a 3 minutes warm-up, then set to transmit receive. 5. AFCS set to standby. The automatic flight control system is the Skyhawk's autopilot system. It will maintain heading, altitude and pitch and bank angles, and is also able to perform a coordinated turn to a pre-selected heading automatically. Placing this switch to standby provides electrical power to the AFCS for warm-up. The system should be in standby at least 90 seconds prior to engaging the stability augmentation switch, or the AFCS main engage switch. Skipping fuel quantity check. Skipping oxygen quantity check. 12. Standby ADI, erect, off flag not visible. Adjust by left click and hold, and then turn the mouse wheel. Skipping compass panel setup. Skipping rain removal system check. Skipping AFCS checks. Skipping navigation computer check. Skipping Doppler radar check. Skipping check flight devices operation. 19. Rudder trim, check and set at 0. Turn the knob while checking the left gauge. '21. Horizontal stabilizer. Set. Adjust using the trim hat on the HOTAS. For short takeoff use 6 degrees nose up. '22. Aileron. Stick centered, check both left and right trim. Adjust using the trim hat on the HOTAS. Skipping external fuel tanks check. Skipping emergency fuel transfer check. Congratulations, this concludes the after-engine light-off section of the Shore Cold Start procedure. The aircraft is now ready to taxi. You have successfully finished this training mission. On the next mission we will learn the shore taxi and takeoff procedures. For now please exit the training by pressing spacebar.